Robert's divorce is the 24th and final episode of the 4th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Wil Shriner, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And initially I wasn't sure I'd enjoy this one because it's mostly told in flashbacks, and I generally, with sitcoms or anything, I'm not a huge fan of flashbacks. Sometimes they can work well, and actually there is one scene in this that I really thoroughly enjoyed. So I didn't love it as much as some episodes, but I still thought it was actually pretty decent and better than I expected. It starts off with everybody out to dinner, minus the children. Amy is there, and Robert is actually making jokes about the bull incident now, so clearly he's in a much better headspace. They're out celebrating him going back to work and finding his feet again, and as he goes to the bathroom, everybody else spots Robert's wife across at another table. This is Joanne, played by Suzie Plakson, and Ray then begins to tell a story, and we have a series of flashbacks. First of all, we're over at Robert's apartment, and Ray and Debra are there, and what I will say is when we have these flashbacks, they always rehash the same joke. It's always Debra saying how thankful she is that Marie and Frank live just across the road. Here she said, "It's so great that we live across the street from them." And honestly, after multiple flashbacks, that gets a little bit old, and I was worried that this was going to have the same jokes over and over again, but actually that was the only time when it felt a little stale, like something we'd seen before. And we quickly realised that Joanne is not very nice. She is criticising absolutely everything about Robert, everything he does. It is really painful to watch. We're then at Debra and Ray's house, and Robert's there, and they decide to confront him and say, "Look, Joanne's not very nice to you." And Robert, he doesn't disagree, but he doesn't want to hear it. But then Marie and Frank come over, and what's interesting about this, and I did enjoy this part of the episode, is that Frank immediately agreed, doesn't like her. Marie's holding her tongue. Marie is not going to butt in. She's not going to say anything. And it kind of made me wonder, was this a lesson learned? Is this why she butts into Debra and Ray's relationship so much? Because she didn't with Joanne. And of course we know that that ended in divorce. So maybe if Robert and Joanne had stayed together, maybe Marie would have never become so critical of Debra. Who knows? And we then go back to the apartment with Robert and Joanne. Robert is eating a banana and watching cartoons, and Joanne starts to complain at him for not studying for the sergeant's exam. And then Ray comes over, and this is when things got really great. I really enjoyed it from this point to the end. Well, almost the end, but I'll talk about that in a moment. Ray comes over, and Joanne says, kind of flippantly, she doesn't say it as if she's sounding like she's trying to be mean, but she says to Ray that he needs to leave because Robert needs to study, and Ray is not the best influence on him. And it didn't take long for Robert to stand up and tell Joanne that she does not get to talk to Ray like that. And he stood up for his brother, and it's kind of like all of these things he'd been holding on to just came rushing out of him. And Joanne's not going to take this. How dare Robert say anything to her that doesn't indicate that she's perfect? That's kind of the vibe I was getting from her. And she just says to him, "I want a divorce." And that's when Marie comes over, and they explain that they've broken up, that Joanne, I mean, to be fair, it was quite dramatic. Usually if somebody, well, I'd imagine if somebody says, "I want a divorce," you wouldn't go, "Oh, okay then, let's get a divorce." I feel like there'd be a bit of a conversation after that, especially if it's said in the heat of the moment, but they did just kind of run with it that that relationship was done now. Maybe also because Robert was kind of feeling that as well, so he didn't really push back on that. I also wonder if maybe Joanne didn't actually want a divorce, she wanted to hurt Robert, but when he didn't go grovelling to her, she realised that he's not the little lapdog that she wants him to be, so maybe a divorce is the best option. And as I said, Marie comes over, they tell her what's happened, and she says to him, "Joanne dumped you?" And she really lets go. And again, as we saw with Robert, all of the things she'd been holding on to, she just unleashes. And at one point she said that she knew she was a topless dancer called Cinnamon in Atlantic City, which was, I have to admit, very bizarre. Quite a strange part of the narrative, and a little bit peculiar, but I don't mind it too much. And Then she said two things. One I think sounded very unhinged, but one was beautiful. And she said these one after the other. She's basically pushing Joanne out, not physically, but she's, with her words, she's barking at her, and Joanne is getting ready to leave. And she says to her, "Nobody dumps my son," which definitely is unhinged. People are allowed to dump your son, Marie. That's not something that you can stop. But then she said, "It's time to take out the trash." And she shuts the door on Joanne. And it was just a really great moment. And then Robert says, "3 minutes ago, I was watching cartoons and eating a banana," which is very sweet and very innocent, but also shows that in a matter of minutes, everything can change. We then are back in present day. We're in the restaurant. Robert comes back from the bathroom and Joanne comes over because she's seen them at this point. And she then leaves. She gives Robert her number because she's back in town. Maybe he can catch up with her. And he crumples it up, throws it in an empty glass. Joanne has left by this point. They're then talking about how it was a mistake, and Frank says, "Some mistakes last 43 years, and he cuddles up to Marie, and they're both smiling, and it's such a really sweet moment. They all leave, and then Robert walks back to the table, and we see him, and Ray sees him picking up Joanne's phone number that he'd crumpled into the glass. And honestly, I can't remember what happens with that. I've seen the show before, but it's been a long time since I watched it all the way through. And I can't remember if he does anything with that. But I really hope not. He's just got Amy back. The divorce was clearly meant to happen. She clearly doesn't deserve him. Joanne, I mean. So, I don't know. It just feels a little bit... Maybe Robert feels like he didn't get closure. We'll find out, I assume, because that would be a weird way to end things if they don't do anything else with it. But it's not how I wanted the season to end. But the episode itself, very, very good. Personal highlights would have to be, well, certainly Robert and his eating a banana, absolutely adorable. Marie's performance, the fact that Marie initially didn't want to butt in, I do feel like maybe because she ended up exploding at Joanne, she learned that it wasn't wise to hold her tongue with Ray and Debra's relationship. It didn't work out well there, so maybe she needs to try something different with Ray and Debra. That's kind of my reading of that, but maybe that's not the case. And yeah, I think it worked really well. As I said, don't really love flashback episodes in general, but this one was for the most part, a pleasant surprise. And ultimately, I think it's safe to say that Robert's divorce is not a bad way to end the 4th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. I'm looking forward to getting started with the 5th season. As I said, I can't really remember exactly what happens next. In fact, I definitely can't remember what happens next in the next episode. I do remember some stories that are coming up. Looking forward to rediscovering those. And pleased to say, Robert's divorce is a really good episode.